the chance of getting shot at. I don't. I walk very obviously, often holding my camera above my head.
A plastic surgeon who tried to kill a fellow doctor because he wanted him out of the way has been jailed for at least 22 years. 61-year-old Peter Brooks stabbed Graham Perks after trying to set fire to his house in Nottinghamshire. Israeli forces have intercepted a small aid boat heading to Gaza. The vessel, which was carrying activists, including Greta Thunberg, was boarded by soldiers in the early hours of this morning. The Swedish campaigner has released this video.
If you see this video, we have been intercepted and kidnapped in international waters by the Israeli occupational forces. I urge all my friends, family and comrades to put pressure on the Swedish government to release me and the others as soon as possible.
Israel says the ship, which is called a selfie boat, has been taken to port and said the aid it was carrying was inconsequential. And the author Frederick Forsyth has died at the age of 86. Best known for his first book, The Day of the Jackal, the former RAF pilot turned journalist has been described as one of the world's greatest thriller writers. His friend, the Conservative MP David Davis, says there was always an element of truth to his work.
He's a sort of realistic Ian Fleming. You know, Bond was total fantasy. Everything that Freddie wrote about was based in a real world.
In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 5 points at 88.32. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.18. LBC weather, rain becoming confined to central northern England and Wales tonight, becoming dry in Scotland and Northern Ireland, a low of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm James Kitchen.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
It's a new week, it's a new cross question here on Monday. It's 8 on LBC. Let me tell you who's on the panel tonight. To my immediate left, Baroness Jenny Jones, Green Party peer, former Deputy Mayor of London, who I think I must have interviewed you, Jenny, more times than anyone else over the years.
No,
I'm sure
that's
I have.
Unbelievable.
Well, you're welcome every time you come on.
Well, thank you.
Andrew Robathan is a Conservative peer, former Defence Minister and a former British Army officer. Welcome back to you, Andrew. To my right, we have Lucy Harris, former Brexit Party and Conservative MEP, but not at the same time, and also former Special Advisor. And to her right, Andy McDonald, Labour MP for Middlesbrough. Welcome back to you, Andy, as well. So, lots to talk about tonight. I'm sure we're going to get questions on the winter fuel allowance U-turn, but there's so much more. We've got the spending review on Wednesday. We've got the protest, riots, call them what you will, in Los Angeles, and so much more to talk about. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, the number 0345 6060 973. We hope you'll be watching us on Global Player or the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Hi, let's start with a text question from Peter in Exeter. Reform and the Conservatives have both said that they forced Labour to reverse their winter fuel policy. Is the Labour government being run by opinion polls, Andy McDonald?
No, I think that's an inaccurate assessment. I think there's been an awful lot of response to the initial decision. People from the backbenchers in the Labour Party made it abundantly clear, as did our membership, that this was not the right policy measure, and there was a big outcry when it was first imposed. I'm just pleased that the government have listened, and it just shows the power of persuasion when it's pointed out that this would just be utterly disastrous. It was the wrong thing to do to visit this on pensioners, and I'm pleased that the Chancellor and colleagues have turned this around and done the right thing and lifted the bar so that more people qualify. I would prefer universalism and recoup through taxation, but this is a measure, this is a method that's been deployed, and I think it's the right outcome. So I think credit where credit is due.
You made a good fist of defending it, but isn't it an embarrassment, though, to U-turn so quickly and to not... I mean, I've always thought if you're going to U-turn, whichever government you are, if you're going to do it, you do it properly. And they've announced this in 3 different stages, and we still don't know how it's going to be paid for.
I think it's less painful if you just get on with it and do it. It shouldn't have been done in the first place, but we got to the right outcome. I'm less worried about the embarrassment and around the sort of security that it gives to people in my constituency who say, well, that's done now. I can rely upon this for the next winter. And it's those people who need it. I'm not worried about those who are rich enough to be able to absorb this. They've got to be, that can be treated another way. But for my constituents who looked at this and thought, that's going to be really useful to me, especially when energy bills are continuing to rise. But, yes, it's embarrassing, but it's more important to get it right than worry about your own reputation in these circumstances. But damage has been done, Ian, I know that, and I accept that. But I'm just glad we've got to the right place.
Lucy Harris.
Yeah, well, I think this is the first one of the first glimpses we saw of Labour austerity, and I just find it quite strange how this review is going to look at the savings from this winter fuel U-turn, and you'll actually see that the 15 billion that it's going to cost to house immigrants for the next few years is quite stark. They're not actually saving that much money. There are other places where they could save money. I feel like it was a pretty useless policy in the first place, and there was no political leverage that they could have got from it. In fact, I think it's been egg on their face, and I think they're being run by fear. That I think they are scared of reform, and I think they're doing everything they can to catch up.
OK, Jenny Jones?
Going back to the question that Peter put, I mean, the idea that Reform and the Conservatives actually forced Labour to change lines is complete and utter nonsense.
Was it the Greens?
They jumped onto a bandwagon. We would have been saying it before they were, definitely. I still can't understand why the Labour government thought it was a good idea. I mean, that absolutely defeats me. Why punish the poorest in society? I used to get the winter fuel allowance. I immediately gave it to somebody who needed it. So I passed it on, but I realise that's not an ideal way of running the economy. But really, it was idiotic. And now we need to see a reverse ferret from the Labour government on the two-child benefit cap and on the invalid payments as well. It's personal injury payments. It's just madness. They are alienating their own voters.
But Rachel Reeves, if she were here, she would no doubt be saying, well, look, I've got to balance the books. The things that you've just said that you want her to do, I've got no idea what they would cost, but it would be quite a few £1 billion. You're not going to tell me how you would pay for that?
Yeah, sure, I'll tell you how to pay for it. You tax the rich.
That's the answer to everything, isn't it?
Do you think that might be because it's right? There's a bunch of millionaires who keep saying, please tax us more. If you want to live in a society where, the public transport, where people can get to work in your factories or whatever, and you want kids educated so that you actually have workers who know what they're doing, that sort of thing, you've got to pay your way. And so I would say taxing the rich is a perfect way of paying for lifting the poor out of poverty.
Andrew?
Well, it's nice to agree with Annie McDonald on something, which is that I think the whole winter fuel allowance was wrong. It should have been incorporated in a much better way into the pension system or whatever. I think it was brought in by Gordon Brown, wasn't it? So it's not of long-standing extent. I got the winter fuel allowance. How stupid was that? I mean, I didn't need it. Jolly nice to have. I didn't give it away. I spent half.
Typical Tory.
Typical Tory.
Why should I go give it away?
What did you spend it on?
Well, for the reasons that Jenny did.
Might be the moral thing to do, I don't know.
No, well, it wasn't the moral thing to do. Why was it the moral thing? Should I give away my pension as well? Well, come on, Andy. Should I give away my... Anyway, I got it. It was a stupid thing to do.
I want to ask.
A stupid thing to have, and actually I think where we would agree is that you should have a system which taxation is used so the poorest people don't pay it. People like myself would have paid it. And just increase the pension, get away with living fuel allowance entirely. And we've got far too much on benefits as it is.
But if you increase the pension, I don't know how many pounds a week. I mean, this is apparently, the government was saving £1.5 billion. The U-turn means that they're only going to save 250 million. So if you think about it, even if you use the £1.5 billion to put into the pension system, would the pension go up by, I don't know, £2 a week or something? People wouldn't really notice that, would they?
Well, £2 a week comes in at £100. If it was £4 a week, come in at £200, which is what you're talking about. I think that would be better
But everyone gets it, though.
Yeah, everybody gets it. But those people like myself who can afford it, and I do get the old age pension, and I don't give that away. Do you give yours away? And I, it'd be fair. I could pay more in taxation.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's obviously causing a huge amount of...
by the way, in answer to a question, of course it wasn't Reform or the Tories. It was the people of the Red Wall and people, the backbench of the Labour Party who said it had to be changed. Not any other party, not even the Greens.
Do you worry, Andy, that there are other policies that the government is going to be lobbied to row back on? I mean, the private school fees, the VAT on that, for instance, that has not brought in what it was supposed to. You've had, I think, a multiple of what the government thought would, the number of kids that have been taken out of private schools and gone into the state sector. They seem to think that's a good thing, though, because there are free school places to take them. But I mean, that's another one where you could easily argue that ought to be reversed.
Well, I think the government has been under considerable pressure to look again at the two-child cap. Now, that's not a policy that was introduced by the Labour government, but it's one that a lot of people would like to see lifted. It would have the most immediate impact on child poverty that you could do with one single policy. It would lift 300,000 to 500,000 children out of poverty at a stroke. And I just saw a report today looking at the poverty in some parts of my own constituency. And poverty costs a fortune. It also has massive detrimental impacts for people. And I see that the under fives in my constituency, in those deprived areas, do so much worse by the time they get to the age of 5 years old. It's something they cannot catch up. Now, the economic impact of that is utterly colossal, and we shouldn't be visiting poverty upon children. So there's one policy that people are going to become under immense pressure to change. Similarly, with the welfare benefit changes, that is not a good idea to put more people into poverty and to take away those lifelines, the personal independence payment that is there to help people to keep in work. To take that away isn't going to work as the government intended.
Sorry,
he doesn't sound very Labour, does he?
Absolutely Labour.
No, I'm teasing him.
He's red to his core.
And that's what the Labour Party comes into power to do, is to lift people out of poverty.
But do you worry,
it's our mission.
Andy, do you worry that your Labour Party is a party of the past, and that the current Labour Party, when you get the Prime Minister making speeches reminiscent of Enoch Powell, sort of talking about islands of strangers, this is not the party that you grew up in?
Today, a decision has been made to correct an error, which I very much welcome. That is more in keeping with traditional Labour values than the sort of things you're talking about. I think that was... I wonder whether in his quiet moments Keir Starmer bitterly regrets using those words, because they resonated with people, not in the way that he expected. He does not expect a Labour leader to be using that sort of phraseology. And I think sometimes the people around Keir need to give their heads a shake and think about the party that they're supposed to be there to represent in policy making and development, because sometimes I think they forget. And saying that sort of thing, especially given what we suffered in August of last year, to go and use that sort of inflammatory language was dangerous. Now, he will tell us that that's not what I meant at all. I meant the exact opposite. Well, OK, let's give the benefit of the doubt. But as one of my colleagues said in a very, very direct and semi-public fashion in the Parliamentary Labour Party, in sack your speechwriters, because that was just so tone deaf. Well, that would be... Iain, you're asking me to be indiscreet.
Well, I just thought in a weak moment you might have been. I think worth a try.
I think it was in the papers.
Right, interesting discussion. We'll move on in just a few moments. If you'd like to put your questions to our panel, 0345 6060 973. 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
Right, let me remind you who's in the studio. We have Andy McDonald, Labour MP for Middlesbrough, Lord Andrew Robathan from the Conservatives, Baroness Jenny Jones from the Greens, and Lucy Harris, formerly of the Brexit Party, now back in the Conservative fold.
Yes, since 2019.
Excellent, so. Right. I don't say excellent as a value judgment on my part, but just as a way to move on.
That's what you...
Yeah. Right. Let's go to a text question from Will in Birmingham. Is sending the National Guard in to tackle protesters the action of a dictator? Now, the Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has launched legal action against the Trump administration for deploying the US National Guard to tackle protesters in Los Angeles who've been objecting to raids being carried out by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE. Within the last couple of hours, Trump has said the protesters are bad people and should be in jail. Andrew.
I hope you're not expecting me to defend President Trump, because
I don't care what you do. You can defend him if you want. If you don't want to defend
him. I'd had a vote, I would have voted for the ghastly, useless Kamala Harris on the grounds she was less dangerous than Trump. And I think we're seeing that. I don't know enough about the National Guard in Los Angeles. I really don't know enough about it. But I do think it's a very bad thing to have in any nation reservist soldiers, such as the National Guard, fighting people on the streets. I mean, a very, very bad thing. And I think Trump is actually winding it up, which is again a very foolish thing to do. I'm aghast actually at the situation in the US. Not because Biden was good, he wasn't. Not because Kamala Harris would have been good, she'd have been terrible. But this is a country that's led the free world for all my lifetime, and now we've got this shocking situation. I really do think it's shocking.
Jenny?
Going back to the question again, yes, he is aiming to be a dictator if he isn't already. And it was quite interesting watching various clips, because those guards were actually shooting fairly indiscriminately, and one of them actually aimed and shot at an Australian journalist who was
we talked to a British photojournalist who was shot in the leg. We talked to him from his hospital bed earlier in the programme.
Yeah.
And I said, do you think they actually meant to target you? And he said, I genuinely don't know.
Well, with the Australian woman, it was filmed. You saw the soldier look round, see her, aim his rifle and shoot. So, yes. I mean, what sort of...
Was it a rifle or a baton round? Do you know?
I think they were shot.
They were shots?
Yeah.
Well, rubber bullets.
Rubber bullets, baton rounds, yeah.
Is that what it is?
No, it was a bullet that was embedded in his leg.
Then that was a bullet. Yeah, I was just trying to find out, actually.
Yeah. Right. So, yes, Trump is a dictator, and the sooner...
Do you not have confidence in the checks and balances in the US Constitution?
Well, the fact that he just overrode the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, and just sort of sent in troops against the governor's advice, I just think that is appalling. He's not listening to any sort of democratic process, Trump. He's actually just...
There have been plenty of presidents that haven't gone along with governors in the past. That didn't make them dictators.
No, but did they send in guards? Did they send in troops?
Well, but surely the National Guard, the clue is in the name, national. And if there's a crisis, you send in the National Guard to help sort it out. And as I understand it, the situation in Los Angeles today is a lot quieter than it has been over the last 3 days.
My understanding is that they were peaceful protests until the guards arrived, and then, of course, people started fighting back. So the question is Trump a dictator? Can you seriously argue, Iain, that he isn't?
I can argue that he has aspirations in that direction, but I do have some confidence in the US Constitution to prevent him from doing what he clearly wants to do, run for a third term, and all the rest of it.
He just ignores the Constitution. I mean, he overrode the governor of a state, which just isn't done unless
that's not against the Constitution.
Well, it's against common sense, I'd say.
Well, maybe, but that doesn't quite add to your argument. Lucy?
Well, look, I mean, I think California's had a lot of problems with crime for some time, and I wonder why Trump is doing this. I think he's trying to show some strength against a Democratic governor. I think he's trying to show an example, and I think he's trying to show that he is the one who's going to come in and create order where there is chaos. Not that I'm advocating for anything in any shape or form, but I'm just trying to understand why one would do this. And I think he's trying to show that as a leader, he can be firm, which California hasn't seen much of for some time. I mean, crime rates have shot up, homelessness shot up. Gavin Newsom isn't doing a good job. And I think we've seen that with the fires that were there a few months ago. We've seen that with robberies in shops. He's allowing things to just, I think there's like a limit that you can steal. I think, what was it, $25 or $100 you can steal from a shop without getting hauled up by the police or the cops. And, I think this sort of recklessness and sort of no lawlessness, I think, is something that he wants to be seen to be dealing with.
You don't think he's just trying to deflect from his spat with Musk?
No, I really don't. I don't think that's an issue for him. What? I think he's just trying to just deal with the issue at hand, which is an increasing polarization in a very, very important part of his country.
Donald Trump is speaking to reporters about this right now. He's just called Gavin Newsom incompetent and has gone back to blaming him for this unrest. Andy McDonald.
Well, I mean, Lucy's talked about Trump bringing order where there is chaos. I think his MO is the exact opposite. His determination is to cause chaos wherever he lands, and he does it with international relations. He's doing it now. This is for dramatic impact. And, it is a really sad situation that we've got, perhaps our most significant ally is led by this crazy narcissist at the moment. This is really, really worrying for not just for America, but for the rest of the world.
See, it's so refreshing having you on the programme because all these newly elected Labour MPs that we have on, very nice people generally, but all they will say, well, of course, Donald Trump is the officially elected president of the US, and we have to deal with him, and they always make quite warm comments about him.
Well, we do have to deal with him. That is the reality, but it doesn't stop me describing what I see in front of me, which is a man who's totally out of control, and he's not doing the reputation or international standing in the United States any good whatsoever.
Control him?
Well, I'd like to think there would be some sort of constitutional control, but, as we've already heard, he intends to set that aside and stand for a third term. I don't think he's got any respect for any of the institutions at all. He just wants to behave like a toddler. I want my way, and I'm going to have it now, no matter what it costs. Look at his behaviour with President Zelensky. What an absolutely outrageous way to behave with a head of state who's right in the teeth of a war against the aggressor, Putin. And he is treated like that with such contempt and disrespect. Are we supposed to hold this man in high regard, or hold his office in high regard, and we look to the United States as a trusted and vitally important partner? But I can't wait for these 3 years plus to run down till he's out of office, and hopefully the Constitution holds.
Well, then we can get J.D. Vance. Because the Democrats are nowhere, are they?
Well, that's right. They've got to get their act together big time. And they've got to come with somebody who can hold out some hope for the United States. Because there's, yes, he won the election. I don't doubt that. Whilst he discounted the one that went before, he won the election. But there are people in the United States who are hurting. They hate the way their nation is being led, and
half of them do.
Half of them do. That's my point. Is half of them do, and they certainly don't like the way their nation is being portrayed in the rest of the world. And it's not a good time for the US, and it's not a good time for the rest of the world.
Kevin says, Ian, you're happy for your guests to criticise Donald Trump, but then you strongly defend him when they do. No, I play devil's advocate because if somebody says one thing as the host of the programme, I'm then going to say the other and put it to them to defend their position. That's kind of my role. Let's take a follow-up text question from Sam in Borden. I don't know where Borden is.
Hampshire.
Is it? Right.
As army base.
As a British journalist has been hurt, should the British government condemn Trump? Jenny?
I think the British government's been very lily-livered about this. I take Andy's point that you have to respect the office, but at the same time, the man is out of control. And I can understand why Starmer's being sort of playing nice, but at some point you have to develop a backbone, and I think perhaps we've reached that point.
But Starmer's played a blinder, hasn't he, with Donald Trump?
Well, has he? Well, I'm not sure what we've got.
Well, he's got a trade deal, which is which is more than the Conservatives ever got.
He hasn't really.
No, I don't want to.
I don't think it's much of a trade deal, actually.
I don't want to
really
agree with Andrew here. Yeah, right. I'm thinking again about what I've just...
Not much of a trade deal. Slightly better than it would have been otherwise, is what I'd put it.
Well, that's a win, isn't it? Given how he's treating every other country.
It's not as good as it was a year ago.
No, but given how he's treating every other country, it's a win for Britain, and you should be praising Keir Starmer for that.
It still has to kick in.
It still has to kick in as well.
He just wants to meet the king again.
Just one word. I was listening to another panel programme over the weekend, and on that panel programme, all the guests talked over each other, and I switched off in the end because I couldn't believe how awful it sounded. So I'm going to be much more rigorous than I have been in the past about people speaking at the same time. So if you'd kindly not do that, that would be great. Andy, should the government condemn Trump over this British photojournalist who's been hurt? Well, shot.
Well, we've just alluded to the conversation have to take place across the Atlantic. I think more importantly, it's being concerned about this overreaction and a violent reaction in the first instance, and one of our own citizens has been shot. I think we're perfectly entitled to complain about that and say, what on earth is going on when you're apparently using live rounds to shoot into a crowd of journalists or pick one off. That is not acceptable. And I think in the strongest diplomatic terms, I think the United Kingdom government is perfectly entitled to say this is not acceptable.
So maybe not call the ambassador in for an interview without coffee, but saying something publicly.
I think
maybe
our watershed for calling ambassadors in needs to be looked at a bit more carefully. I think, my goodness me, it's taken a long, long time for certain ambassadors to be called in by the Foreign Office. And I doubt very much that this is going to reach that watershed.
Well, maybe it's a job for Lord Mandelson to make the representations in Washington.
Okay, yeah. Best of luck, Pete, with that one.
Lucy?
I sort of think that if you're a journalist, you kind of know what the job entails. And if you're going... No, but it's not necessarily... You're going into a riot situation. I mean, it's not...
Yeah, but you might expect to be harmed by the rioters. You don't necessarily expect the forces of law and order to shoot.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose it's one of those situations where, measuring the extent of the danger is one of those things I think, should have been considered. But look, I think one of those it's one of those things where it's unusual, and there's a lot of unusual happenings going on in America these days.
Well, that is certainly true. Thank you for that. We'll take more of your questions on some different subjects in a moment. The words Greta and Thunberg might be mentioned in the title of the next question, just as a little tease for you to stay listening. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC Now at 8:30 with James Kitchen.
The Conservatives say the government should apologise to those who lost their winter fuel payment last year. In a U-turn, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has announced 9 million pensioners will now be eligible for the benefit in England and Wales. California's governor is suing Donald Trump after the US president deployed National Guard troops to Los Angeles. The city's seen several days of protests following a series of raids by immigration enforcement agents. And the author Frederick Forsyth has died at the age of 86. He wrote more than 25 books, selling 73 million copies worldwide, and has been described as one of the greatest thriller writers of all time. LBC weather: outbreaks of rain across northern England and Wales tonight, becoming drier in Scotland and Northern Ireland, a low of 5 degrees.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32 on the panel tonight. Andy McDonald, Labour MP for Middlesbrough, used to be neighbour of Peter Mandelson, didn't you?
Yes, he was in Hartlepool.
Was that a pleasurable experience?
Well, our paths didn't exactly cross the timeline, so one of us was fortunate.
Oh dear. Andrew Robathan, Conservative peer, former Defence Minister and also former British Army officer. Baroness Jenny Jones, Green Party peer. What I haven't said, of course, you used to be Deputy Mayor of London.
You did say that in your introduction, actually. Yes. I worked with Ken.
Do you miss that?
No, it was hard work, actually. And I used to have to go out with a speech from Ken and give the speech.
Oh dear.
And then I was able to say, but the Green Party thinks, and his advisors got very ratty.
And Lucy Harris is here, former Brexit Party and Conservative MEP. Wayne in East Grinstead says, is Greta Thunberg achieving anything other than yet more virtue signalling? Now, the climate activist was one of 12 people who were on board the aid boat Madeleine, which was boarded by Israeli forces after attempting to breach the blockade around Israel's coastline to take aid into Gaza. The government in Tel Aviv have claimed it was carrying less than a single truckload of aid and was just a selfie yacht, while, in a message recorded prior to the ship being boarded, Ms Thunberg claims she has been kidnapped. She's not a kid anymore. The boat has now docked in Israel, and a photo of her in Ashdod port has been posted by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And apparently, the Israeli authorities are going to force all 12 of these people to watch videos from October the 7th, which I'm sure breaches their human rights in some way, but good on them, I say. Sorry, I offered an opinion then, Jenny. Apologies for that. Lucy.
Well, I wonder about the carbon emissions of getting all of that team back to the UK. So I think the only thing...
Is it a UK thing?
Back to Europe then, sorry. And, you know, I just wonder about whether this sort of activism really does help her cause. I mean, she's now conflating, you know, climate activism with Gaza and the Middle East issues. And I just think, does it make ordinary people come on side? I don't think it does. And I think it actually does an adverse effect for any climate activism that takes place. I think she's only undoing quite a lot of other work that other people have been doing in that arena.
Jenny?
Well, I disagree completely.
Of course you do.
It's lovely to hear you talk about carbon emissions. I'm really glad you're sort of on point about that. But quite honestly, the whole thing about a climate agenda is it incorporates human rights. And I would say the basis of that question is wrong, because we're not talking about Greta Thunberg. What we're talking about is the fact she's actually highlighting a terrible, terrible series of events in Gaza. And the fact
Why does it need her to highlight them? We all know about them.
But we are talking about her now. She has highlighted it. And in fact, it appears that the Israeli government has actually gone way beyond its powers, arresting a boat or kidnapping a boat in international waters, flying a British flag. I'm going to be very interested to hear what the Labour government's going to do. I'm surprised it isn't the French that have done it,
given the fishing boats that they arrested off Jersey back in the day.
But the point is that climate activism incorporates human rights. You can't have an engaged population if you don't have... It's what Andy said earlier. God, I'm agreeing with him a lot. I'm sorry about that. About poverty costs money. And when you actually devastate a country, you are increasing the exponential damage to society. And Israel has created a generation of activists with what they're doing now. They'll never, ever forget this.
Andrew?
Well, as somebody who is not a member of the Green Party, but is a very green and a great environmentalist, I think Greta Thunberg...
Why did you cough then?
Well, he's always talking about riding a bike. You know, I'm really pleased he rides a bike.
I've planted at least 12 acres of trees.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thanks. Cost me quite a lot of money. For God's sake. Anyway...
You paid for it out of your winter fuel allowance.
Yeah.
Sadly, they were more expensive than £200. But what I would say is that Greta Thunberg, I don't think, has been a great activist for climate change, which is really important. But I think
she hasn't been. Who has?
I think she's been a pain in the neck, francly. And
isn't that what activists are supposed to be?
Suddenly she knows about Palestine. Oh, fantastic! I bet she's been there a lot. You know, I mean, she's self-publicized. self-publicising now, it seems to me. And frankly, I think most people in this country would say, what on earth was she doing there? Very serious situation in Gaza. Let's not go there just a moment. Very serious, but I don't think she's done anything useful towards it at all.
But do you think that had anyone else been on that boat that wasn't Greta Thunberg, that anybody would have taken any notice of it?
It's only the media that have taken any notice of her because she's a big star. That's all. But actually,
that's the whole point, isn't it?
Does anybody watching your programme not know that there are very serious matters in Gaza and have been since October the 7th, 2023? We all know that. Surely anybody watching your programme will know that the Palestinians in Gaza have been subject to a terrible time, and that's a matter for a great deal more discussion as to whether or not Israel is right. It's a very difficult one, that one.
Andy?
Well, I think we've just got to concentrate on what this is all about. We've got 2.2 million people trapped in Gaza. We have egregious breaches of the genocide, the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statutes. People are starving to death and aid is not getting through. And yet we want to take a rise out of Greta Thunberg, who's using her platform. I think she's incredibly courageous and should be admired for what she has done, because she's got us talking about it on this programme. She's drawn yet more attention to it. It is what she can do. That's her. She has that platform, and it's absolutely right that she should do it. And she exposes the fact that no aid is getting through. She didn't pretend for one single second that the aid aboard that vessel was going to make a jot of difference. But what she was trying to demonstrate is we've got the Mediterranean Sea available to us to get all the aid in that we would wish, and by road if Israel would cooperate in that. But no, they want to use their own aid facilities to draw people into and shoot them. It's a shooting gallery for people. We heard the story of a boy receiving medical aid inside a tent, and the medic is attending to his needs, and a bullet penetrates the side of the tent and shoots him in the head. These are the things that are happening on a daily basis, and I think anybody who draws attention to the most egregious humanitarian crisis on the planet right now, it has my full and utter support. Congratulations to Greta Thunberg, and then for the Israelis to arrest her and her colleagues in international waters should set alarm bells ringing. And it's about time the Israeli government were held to account and international law was upheld.
Well, we need to get rid of... Netanyahu and the coalition he has around him is not a good thing, to put it mildly. And he's kept there, of course, by proportional representation, which has created the coalition. My own view is there needs to be an election to get rid of him. And actually, I think the people of Israel would like to get rid of him as well. And that would be a good start. Look, and also he wants to prolong the war because he wants to keep himself in power. This is how it seems to be. And there must be a solution. There has to be a solution, both the broader issue with two states or whatever, and there has to be a solution to Gaza as well.
Yeah, well, it isn't the annihilation of the Gazan
It isn't happening
people.
Now. It isn't happening now. Netanyahu's not interested in the solution. Netanyahu wants the war to continue, in my opinion. But what you haven't mentioned is Hamas and all the evil and wicked things they've done, and actually the way they are keeping the people of Gaza to a large extent under their thumbs. And that's certain, because you try standing up in the middle of Gaza and saying, I don't like Hamas, you won't last very long.
We have seen footage of people doing exactly that, actually.
Yeah, I know, at last.
Well, as you say, it's very difficult.
I mean, that was interesting. I don't know if you're thinking of the same pictures that I saw of some people carrying, I don't know whether it was one dead body or two or three on some sort of trailer, and they were shouting anti-Hamas slogans. Yeah. And that was directly after people had been shot when sort of some aid was getting in, and they seem to be blaming Hamas rather than the Israelis. But that's just one incident.
If I might just say, Hamas, by controlling Gaza, control the aid distribution. This is the really big issue. So they take the aid and they hand it out to who they want to hand it to. The place is more built up than the London Underground. There's so many tunnels.
Not anymore, it isn't.
It's rubble, Andrew.
Yeah. Right, let's move on to something, equally as important. Everyone can judge this. Janet in Oldham says, the NATO chief said that member states need to increase spending or will be speaking Russian. Is this country now finally taking this issue seriously enough? Now, the NATO General Secretary, Mark Rutte, was speaking in London today, saying that the bloc needs a quantum leap in our collective defence and wants them to all agree to contribute 5% of their national incomes on defence at a summit in the Netherlands next week, warning the British people that if this country doesn't make the kind of defence spending increase that he's suggesting, then we had better learn to speak Russian. Former Defence Minister Andrew Robathan.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to defend the last Conservative government, which helped run down the armed forces. But the idea that we'll have 2.7%, is it next year or 2030? I can't remember which is.
2027.
But this is nonsense. You need to spend the money now. We are seriously under threat in a way we were not in the Cold War because we had big defences. So we weren't under threat, but now we are seriously under threat. Go and ask the people of Poland or Latvia or Lithuania how they feel, because they can see what's coming around the corner if Putin is not defeated. Yes, we need to spend a lot more money. Actually, I'd say 5% is about right, give or take. But we need to spend a huge amount more money, and we need to sort out things, some of which were done by the previous Conservative government. We need to sort things out so we've got a decent, respectable defence system which can defend us, but much more to the point, defends our values and defends Europe and everything we care about. I didn't expect T-62s or T-72s, whether they'll come across the channel, but I do know that our values are threatened by what Putin is doing at the moment.
Jenny?
The thing that I worry about most at the moment is the fact that we have an awful lot of American support for our forces, and they are utterly unreliable. And so a lot of the planes we use they're American planes, or they have American parts and so on. So even if we ramp up our defence spending, will we actually be safer? Will that make us safer?
Surely that's a reason to do just that. If you're saying we can't rely on the Americans, then we have to rethink our supply chains and spend more money on getting a lot more equipment elsewhere.
Well, I would argue that we probably can't defeat the Russians on our own, and so we have to think more about how to work
That's what Mark Rutte is saying.
Yes.
So do you agree with him that we should be increasing our defence spending to 5% of GDP?
I think that's counterintuitive, quite honestly, because if you do that, as Andrew just said, I mean, you have to spend it at the right time and in the right place. And I'm not sure we're geared up for it. And quite honestly, I don't trust this Labour government to do it anyway.
But isn't that what people said sort of around 1934, 1935? And then lived to regret it?
I wasn't alive then, so I'm not sure.
Nor was I, but I've read my history books.
I would say that we definitely have to support Ukraine. We have to, if Ukraine goes, then we are probably at risk. But if we can support Ukraine, prevent Russia there, then I think the risk diminishes. But I am not a defence expert.
We've got to spend the money. It's as simple as that. If you don't spend the money, you don't get anything. And the army now. I
suppose it depends what you spend the money on, doesn't it?
That is also true.
We heard last week in the review that we won't be increasing the size of the army in terms of soldiers until well into the 2030s.
Absolutely.
So therefore, what do you do? Do you invest a slug of it on drone warfare, for example, which seems to be the coming thing? Do we spend a lot of it on cyber warfare?
Yes.
Which, I mean, we have increased spending on that. So there's a legitimate debate about what you spend it on.
But we have to spend money on just about everything. Look, we are threatened in a way which we haven't been threatened since the start of the Cold War. We really are threatened. And we should remember that. And
Andy McDonald, it seemed a bit odd to me last week that they released a strategic defence review one day and say, well, we have an ambition for 3% by 2034. And then the next day, Mark Rutte says 3.5%. 2 days later, Donald Trump says 5%. And now Mark Rutte's saying 5%. This is very odd.
It's like an arms race in percentages, isn't it? It's not really very helpful or thoughtful. But I agree with Andrew that we've for years and years we've seen the size of the army reduce to incredibly low numbers, and that's just a surprise to everybody. I think we've got to just take a step back and try to work out how it is when in the situation where Putin felt so emboldened that he could just walk into Ukraine. I mean, he's obviously met with much more resistance than he ever anticipated, so that's an interesting dynamic. But how could it possibly be that he had the confidence to do what he did? And one of the other dynamics at play here is this reliance upon the United States. And I think whatever this current era has brought home is that we have got not only to look to ourselves, but look to our European neighbours to work much more collaboratively. But I would agree. I think you do have to have investment. The security of the nation, defence of the nation is paramount. You can't ignore that. But you shouldn't put that at the total expense of looking at diplomatic solutions long term to create a much more peaceful world. You've got to do both. But the threat is current, and it's on our doorsteps, and the Ukrainian people are suffering from it.
And Lucy, it's going to be very interesting to see what Rachel Reeves says on Wednesday in the spending review, particularly about it. Well, it's going to be interesting, whatever department she's talking about, frankly.
I mean, the best way to defend yourself is economic security, and we are lagging behind significantly on that in so many departments. So when we're talking about increasing spending on defence, increasing spending on education, and increasing spending anywhere, we have to make sure that the economy is growing, and this government hasn't been ensuring that. They increase tax on non-doms, they all disappear. Then they're going to do a reverse ferret on it with investor visas, inverted commas. They don't know what they're doing with the economy. We're now in a difficult situation where we can't afford to protect ourselves. We've got Russia at the doorstep. We've got trade tariffs flying everywhere, increasing costs to us. We've got CBAM at the door. We've got other things that are going to affect our industrial strategy, which is supposedly going to come out at the end of this month. What's going to be in it? Is there going to be, how are we going to manage the steel situation? And you can see Nigel currently in Wales talking about steel, and is that going to create enough steel that we need to defend this country? What is going to be in that strategy? And that's something, if you take a step back, all these questions must be answered, and a question to the economic conversation, an economic answer has to reveal itself, because right now we're in danger.
Are you happy with the Labour government stepping in to save British Steel in Scunthorpe and keep it as a going concern?
I think with tariffs increasing across the world on steel, there are questions as to how we can maintain the level of steel we need to defend ourselves. There is a question.
Right. Let's move on, and we will also, of course, in about 10 minutes' time, come to our fun question for the panel. They always love it, don't you, Jenny?
Yes.
I often find it quite difficult to answer.
Well, that's why I'm going to tell you what it is in the break. It's 8:49.
This is LBC. Apply. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:51. Andy McDonald, Andrew Robathan, Jenny Jones and Lucy Harris with us answering your questions. And here's the next one from Chris in Stubbington. Chris, very good evening.
Hello, Ian and panel. The NHS has called for 200,000 new blood donors to come forward. Are we actively doing enough to persuade people to be donors?
We're going to be talking about this in the 9 o'clock hour, so I'd like to have your calls for that. Now, the NHS says it needs 1 million regular blood donors, but currently only has 800,000 and has been facing a challenging shortage of blood stocks for several months. I don't know if any of you are blood donors. Lucy Harris, let's start with you.
No, I'm terrified of needles. So I wouldn't not do it. I just can't bring myself to do it. You don't have to force me.
I know so many people who, one of my best friends, Dan, is a hulking sort of 20 stone, 6'3" guy.
I'm not.
And he literally has to see a needle and he passes out. Wimp. That's what I call it.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm a wimp.
Okay, Andy.
Well, to defend those people who are absolutely genuinely terrified of needles. Sadly, I'm not able to donate for complicated reasons. But my wife has just given her, I think it's her 40th donation this very day. I think she might be getting a certificate.
Oh.
But but it's a serious issue. There is a real shortage, and I think we're about to tip into sort of the emergency phase. And a call out.
Because it used to be a big thing, didn't it? I remember my dad would go whenever he could to do it, and he got some. He literally went virtually every month to do it. But you never hear of people doing it nowadays.
Well, Tony Hancock, remember?
You're showing your age now.
Sorry.
Andrew.
Well, I used to give and would continue to give, but they stopped me some years ago, probably because I had metal in my bloodstream from false hips. But, I think it's really important, and it used to be a lot easier to do. And as you rightly say, it was very easy. There were lots of places you could get
it still is, Andrew. It's still easy to do.
Well, I think you used to get, for instance, there used to be a lorry to park outside Parliament.
Yeah,
but you don't get it anymore.
There are national transfusion vans going on all over the country.
Yeah, but maybe, but it used to be you could go along to
let's face it, who wants MP's blood?
Yeah.
Well, actually, the electorate most of the time.
Yeah, right. The whole time, exactly. No, I think you've got to make it easy, and you've got to make it attractive. And the biscuit, I don't care about the biscuit they used to get, but it's important to give it. And I think it's one thing you can do as a national service. You can give a little bit of blood. It doesn't take anything out of you.
One thing we need to do in the next hour is actually tell people how they can do it, because there must be a website that tells you sort of in your local area where you can go. But I must admit, okay, you think of your local GP surgery, but they will have a poster up somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
Jenny?
Up until the age of 60, I gave blood regularly, but then I started taking a medication and they couldn't take my blood anymore. But it occurs to me that with such an ageing population, the need for blood is even greater, because there's more and more of us living old and going into hospital for all sorts of things. And so we need all these young people to step forward and be brave. Yes,
be brave. Young blood, Jenny.
Well, there's a number people can ring. It's 0300 123 2323. It's called Give Blood. That's 0300 123 2323.
You should do my job, Andy.
Sorry.
I would give it, but it sounds a ridiculous excuse, but they literally can't get blood out of me. Whenever I have to have a blood test, my diabetic checks, they have to take it out of my hand. Well, you can't take, pints of blood out of your hand. Well, I suppose they could try. But I remember once, sorry, it's not going off the subject, but I remember being in hospital when I fell off the stage. And there's this Eastern European nurse, I don't know what language she was speaking, but she said, I've never done it in the hand before. I said, well, now's your chance. After 5 goes, and she was literally, I could tell whatever language it was she was swearing in. After 5 goes, she actually got some out and started dancing around the room. It's rather sweet, actually. Anyway, let's go to a final question. It's from Oscar in Greenwich. Jenny, you'll like this one. Sadiq Khan is said to be angry that London will be losing out big time from Rachel Reeves's big review. Is Labour just taking the capital for granted? Now, the London Mayor has accused the Chancellor of levelling down the capital city, with reports claiming that London will not get any new investment from the spending review, and projects such as plans to extend London's underground Bakerloo line into south-east London won't be going ahead. Now, Jenny, I'm going to give you a bit more time on this, but everyone else 30 seconds.
Jenny. Oh, that's very generous.
Well, you're a former deputy mayor.
Well, yes, and I lived on the putative Bakerloo line for quite a number of years. It's been going for decades now, the whole plan. I don't think that's ever going to happen anyway. I do feel slightly sorry for Sadiq Khan. I think he gets a terrible press. I was on a bus the other day and the woman behind was going, oh, he's always telling us to go walking and cycling, but he drives around in an armoured vehicle. And I felt inspired to turn around and say that's because he gets death threats and and so does his family. I think that...
What response did you get?
Oh, not very good, no. She was quite annoyed that I'd listened to her conversation. And I said, well, she didn't talk so loudly.
Oh, dear.
But I think London has been overindulged in the past, but that's quite fair because there's a huge number of people living here and we're living at close quarters. I would say that there are things we need possibly more than a Bakerloo line, like more social housing, and that would be... Councils are so cash-strapped at the moment. They could do with some money for social housing.
OK, Andy?
Well, in the decade to 22-23, the average spend in London per person was £1,183. In the north of England, it was £486. And if we look over the period, it's a vast amount of difference between the two. And if we could invest in the north of England the way we do in London and the south east, the difference to the economy would be absolutely enormous. The productivity would rise and it would increase the wealth of this country. And we've got to start thinking beyond this place. I mean, it's the greatest city in the world as far as I'm concerned, but its transport infrastructure is second to none. I know Londoners don't think so at times, but I've got to tell them it's absolutely brilliant where people can get around. But we need that across the rest of the economy. And I do applaud Rachel Reeves for looking again at the Green Book and deciding that that's the way we must do it. We said this back in 2017 and 19, that we would look at the way in which we invest so that it wasn't always done by that business case that would get you a return. You can get a return in London on anything. You need to invest in the other parts of the country so that they can catch up and start to develop and deliver, not just for the people who live there, the 17 million people in the north of England, but for the UK economy.
Lucy?
I think it's a political gimmick. I think that Rachel Reeves is purposely trying to make it look as if London has lost out, so the rest of the country can feel a little bit better about investment apparently going their way. Polling shows this, that last time this happened and they made a big hoo-ha about London getting less money, the rest of the country perked up a little. So I think it's a bit of a gimmick, if I'm honest.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with Lucy, except to say that I do agree with Andy. Again, this is worrying, isn't it? Because actually you're better off in London than you are elsewhere in terms of infrastructure and so on. Has anybody here, you talked about public transport, taking the Transpennine line. You want to try it and you think, this cannot be, it's a Transpennine Express.
Transpennine Slug.
Exactly. It's Transpennine Express, and you're lucky if it's there. And this sort of thing does need sorting out. And actually, we were talking about it in government, I'm glad to say, but I don't see much evidence from us, or indeed from this. I didn't think this Labour government will produce much. Like Lucy,
well, the Transpennine upgrade is really progressing.
Yeah, I'm glad. Because when I went, it hardly moved.
Yeah. Right. Very quickly, our fun question from Alan in Horsham. As a teenager, I absolutely loved reading The Day of the Jackal, me too, and watching the original TV series of it. Following the death of Freddie Forsyth today, which books helped to define your younger years? Jenny?
I think one of the first books I read on my own was a book called Jennifer Goes to School, and it was this very, very tidy little girl who goes to school and she does all her schoolwork, and I think that did influence me, actually. I think my parents are very happy about it. Well, but I always wanted, when I was younger, but probably about 5 and 6, I wanted a prehensile tail, and I'm not sure where that came from. It might have been a prehensile tail. I'd learnt the South American monkeys had a prehensile tail, and I just wanted one of those.
Okay. Explains a lot. Andrew?
Well, there's so many books that influenced me, but I will figure on one, which was an Enid Blyton book, when I was about 8 or 9, and they had a character in it called Kit, who was an American. And my poor son, who actually likes being called Kit, it's called Kit because I really liked the name in the Enid Blyton book. He's Christopher for long, but he's Kit for...
What was it called?
I'm not sure. The Boy Next Door, I think it was called.
All right.
I can describe the story if you'd like.
I loved it. No, I don't. Enid Blyton, Magic Faraway Tree. You can't get better than that. Andy McDonald.
Oh, it wasn't when I was so young. It was probably a little bit later than that. But I think The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was something that just amused me immensely because it was so ridiculous.
Never understood it.
I know that's the point. That was the point, not to understand it.
Everything was 42 or something?
Yes.
Well, the answer to life and everything is 42, but the fact there was a flying Ford Prefect, and it was just it was a bit of an anti-hero sort of narrative, which just amused me immensely.
OK.
Animal Farm was good too.
It was indeed. Lucy?
I've got two. Hot Dog Harris, that adorable, small, scruffy little dog named Harris. My surname is Harris, and it was sort of like a pet I wish I had. And then a more serious one, I love Carol Ann Duffy, so The World and His Wife. It's more of a poetry book. Well, it is a poetry book. My favourite poem, The Moon, which is beautiful, and I suggest you all.
OK, well, thank you all very much indeed. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the General Secretary of the University and College Union, Joe Grady, the editor of the Conservative Home website, Giles Dilnott, Tory MP Alan Mack, and Plaid Cymru's leader in Westminster, Liz Saville-Roberts. So a very eclectic bunch there. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to, as I said, talk about blood donations, because the NHS has warned that it continues to face a challenging blood shortage as it calls for 200,000 new donors to come forward. Concern over blood stocks prompted the Health Service to issue an amber alert last year, meaning that supplies were running low enough to have an impact on patient treatment. So I suppose the message from this hour is going to be, blood donors of the country, come forward now, your NHS needs you. And if you don't donate blood, do you actually have a reasonable excuse? Because if you can donate blood, surely you should. It's your patriotic duty.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Conservatives say the government should apologise to older people who lost their winter fuel payments last year. In a U-turn, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has announced 9 million pensioners will now be eligible for the benefit in England and Wales. The Labour MP Andy McDonald told LBC he welcomed the Treasury's change of heart.
It just shows the power of persuasion when it's pointed out that this would just be utterly disastrous. It was the wrong thing to do to visit this on pensioners, and I'm pleased that the Chancellor and colleagues have turned this